Let's talk about diffusing anger. Now, you're going to say, Barnett, you have told us a million times that you cannot control your feelings. And that's true. You can't control your feelings, like you can't just choose how you feel about a thing. But remember, we can control what we continue thinking about, and that's very powerful. So, what helps diffuse anger? This is going to be a two-parter, so we're going to talk about this, one aspect of this today, and then in the next episode of the Orange Slices, we'll discuss another aspect of it. But the answer to how you can diffuse anger, it comes down to four things: mindfulness, context, insight, and action. So again, mindfulness, context, insight, and action. Now notice what the focus of these things are. They're not on the feeling. They're not on controlling the feeling. They're controlling thoughts, perspectives, which are just thoughts, and one's own action. So, behavior. Not controlling the feelings, but controlling the thoughts, the thinking, controlling behavior as far as what you decide to do. So, being able to stop in the middle of an emotional situation and reflect requires mindfulness. Remember, it's the first one in this list of answers to how to diffuse anger. So imagine you find yourself in a volatile conversation or a situation. In order to be able to, as your emotions are rising and getting elevated, in order to be able to stop in the middle of that and reflect and apply these things, requires mindfulness. You have to always be mindful of how you're feeling and be able to recognize when you're on your way to boiling over. Now notice what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is that you have to recognize when you're already boiling over, or that you have to recognize when you're already in a heightened state. You see, by that time, you've just complicated your situation 100-fold. If you would have caught yourself early on, like right when your emotions begin to go in that direction, if you had caught yourself at that moment, then your job would be much, much simpler. Cops out there messing up my groove. See if they call crime any G's. Boy, it'd be really nice to just soundproof this place. Gosh, that would be a dream come true. So anyway, it's the stray cop. He's running behind. So you have to be able to recognize not when you're already boiling over, but when you're headed in that direction, when your emotions are going in that direction. Now, with a little bit of practice, you can get really good at this. Under most circumstances, this almost is like habit to me now. It's almost like putting on a seatbelt when I get into the car, you know. At first, maybe that's not, it doesn't come natural to you. But with just a little bit of repetition and practice, it starts to become natural, this mindfulness. And so the time to act is really when you begin to notice your feelings just going in that direction. I do this with my friend Jeff all the time. He and I, we don't see eye to eye on so many things, and especially if we get into a discussion about politics or something like that. I can feel in my body when I go from having a pleasant conversation to when now my feelings are starting to head toward anger. And so then because I'm mindful and I can catch it, not way down the road when I'm already really angry, but right when my feelings veer that way. And I'll tell you how I've learned to recognize it. It's when I don't feel good. So we'll be talking along. The conversations, I feel pleasant. I feel good. When I start to not feel good, I recognize it. That's the time when I'll say, my reasoning on it is this. Am I going to change his mind? No, I'm not going to change his mind. His mind's made up on this. Is there any reason then to have this conversation? Nope, there's no reason to have this conversation. So that's when I'll say, hey, why don't we just change the subject, or I will just change the subject. So, hey, by the way, did you see that movie, whatever movie, or did you read that book? It's kind of a smooth way to change the topic, and then I feel we start talking about something else, and I just feel my feelings go, okay, I'm back to feeling pleasant again. So if you can catch yourself right there, right when your emotions start to go that direction, then you've got a lot of options. Mindfulness, context, insight, and action. We're going to talk about context, insight, and action in the next orange slice. But as I was saying, after regular practice of being mindful, you can learn to be mindful very, very successfully. Now, you're never going to be perfect at it because you are not perfect as a person. None of us are. And because of that, perfection in anything is not reasonable and it's not realistic. If you are holding yourself to perfection, what that means is that every time you fall short, then you're really going to be critical with yourself afterwards. You see the relationship there? But if you accept that you're never going to be perfect and you're never going to do anything perfectly, now what happens when you fall short? Well, you weren't holding yourself to an impossible expectation. So now when you fall short, you go, all right, that was to be expected. Let's see what contributed to me falling short. See if there's anything practical there that I can change moving forward, and then you can change it. But you're not overly critical with yourself. You don't hate on yourself. You don't shame yourself or anything like that. Some situations where I might fall short in diffusing my anger is when I'm intoxicated, when I'm sleepy, when I'm hungry, when something catches me entirely by surprise, or how about when I'm feeling miserable, like I've got a terrible headache, or especially any situation where I'm under intense stress. These are situations where it's easy not to handle oneself perfectly, and so we've got to cut ourselves some slack. But that is part of putting things into context, which we're going to talk about in the next orange slice. In these less than ideal conditions, I might find myself already, I might have been negligent, and now I'm already at a heightened state, right? I'm already very angry, and in my life now, after having recovered from borderline personality disorder, I might be already in that angry state when I catch myself, and then I begin applying the other things that we're talking about, like context, insight, and action. What am I talking about when I talk about action? Well, it's like me saying to my friend, hey, let's change the subject, or me changing the subject. Let's say he doesn't want to change the subject, and I'm at his house. Well, maybe it's time for me to go home, or maybe it's time for me to take a walk. I'm removing myself from the situation. We'll talk about that more later. Basically you're making a decision to do anything that's necessary to prevent your emotions from continuing down the road they're currently heading, and that you don't want them going there. But like I said, you're never going to be perfect at it, but under normal circumstances, you can get extremely successful at always keeping one eye on what your emotions are doing, and then applying context and insight, taking action before you ever reach a heightened state. But again, to do this, you have to practice paying attention to how you are feeling and catching yourself right at the point when your emotions begin going in that direction. Your feelings begin to get agitated or begin to get heated, because by catching it right there at that early point, and it's not hard to do. You just have to pay attention to when you go from feeling pleasant to suddenly not feeling too pleasant. It's 1,000 times easier at that point to apply context, insight, or take action to veer your emotions off that direction that they're going, and steer them back into a more pleasant direction. So in the next orange site, we're going to talk about insight, talk about action more. We're going to talk about context, and again, the topic is diffusing anger.